Hello, COM225 students. This is the last time you have to listen to me, so let's celebrate right now. I am your doctor of diatribe and your author of oration. Caleb laughed again. I'm excited about that. So cheesy. Yes, he's into the cheese. All right, so just want to reiterate from lecture number 3, the importance of the 6-step guide. You have to construct all of your speeches according to the 6-step guide. It's not an option. So learn that. Pages 15 through 31 in the textbook. Also, sorry, got to get rid of my cell phone again. I'm just like everybody else. I'm lost without my phone. Also, again, the importance of transition statements between your main points. Page 32 of your textbook has great information on transition statements, so be sure you look closely at that. Remember that transitions look back at what you just spoke about and look forward at what you're going to speak about. It's like a mini review and preview within your speech. It's like a mini launch statement and reiterate statement in your speech. And I mentioned transition statements are often the most missed points during a semester, so get that down. I want to talk a little bit about just some basic communication stuff. We live in what I call a receiver-oriented communication culture. The most basic, down to earth, the oldest, most basic model of communication is that there is a sender of a message. So let's say that's me. I want to send a message to somebody. That means I have to put a message into some sort of code. Language is a code. Gestures are a code. So that makes me an encoder. So I am putting something into code, a message into code. I'm going to send that message along a channel or various channels to, if you have a sender down here, you have a receiver down here, obviously. You knew that. See? That's enthymematic thinking. You already knew before I wrote or said receiver. You said, yes, sender there. It must be a receiver here. That's an enthymeme. So you're learning about Aristotle's enthymeme. And if you have an encoder down here, you have what? Yeah, see, you got it. Decoder. So what's interesting about this is that no two persons in the entire world, 7 point whatever billion people, no two people in the entire world have exactly the same communication code, even if you're speaking the same language. Even if you're speaking the same language to the same ethnicity and the same gender and the same age and the same city, it doesn't matter. No two people have exactly the same code. So if I encode a message and send it to you, you're going to decode the message according to your code, and obviously that's where we start having misunderstandings. Have you noticed that communication is messy? Have you noticed that communication spawns misunderstandings? Well, there you go. We have different codes. That's one of the reasons. Also, each one of us is ensconced in some culture of communication, whether that culture is affected by neighborhood, ethnicity, geography, gender, age, whatever it is. There's culture that's influencing both the encoder and the decoder. So that makes communication even more messy. And so it's getting even more muddled and more muddy. The very second a sender begins sending a message to the receiver starts sending feedback, whether they intend to or not. Whether they intend to give feedback or not, they're sending feedback simply by how they're reacting to the message, either verbally or non-verbally, most often non-verbally, but eventually verbally as well. And so as the sender is sending the message, they're already starting to receive feedback, and they're decoding that feedback. And of course, the way you've encoded that feedback that you don't even maybe realize that you're giving is going to be decoded by somebody who has a different code than you. That makes communication even more messy. And then, of course, communication has all kinds of noise associated with it. If you've taken my COM 100 class, you've been through this before, and you're shaking your head right now. Or you're going to sleep because you already know this stuff. Anyway, so noise, and there's two kinds of noise. So there's external noise, which is also known as physical noise. So that is, you go to a movie and somebody brings their baby and the baby's crying and you can't hear the dialogue. That's an example of external or physical noise. Or you're in a, here you go, I've done some podcasts. I've been interviewed for a number of podcasts in the past. And I never knew this until I started getting interviewed for podcasts, but you can't have air conditioning going on in a room when you're trying to record a podcast. It just doesn't work. It interferes and creates noise that interferes with the message. If somebody were outside right now with a jackhammer or a lawnmower or whatever, it would probably affect what's going on in here. And then, second of all, probably the most difficult, at least with external and physical noise, everybody can recognize, or most people can recognize it, and you can either move somewhere else or ask people to stop or whatever. The other kind of noise, which if it's external, then you have internal, of course. The other kind of noise is not so, in fact, it's almost impossible to detect and try to figure out and try to help. Internal noise is also known as psychological noise. So some of you might have a bit of psychological noise in receiving communication messages from me, just knowing that I also pastor a church. You're a little nervous about that. That would be psychological noise. On Sundays, when I'm speaking to the congregation, there can be psychological noise going on there. If I hit a verse that's challenging and troubling, people don't want to wrestle with that. That can be psychological noise. I remember when nose piercings and nose rings kind of started becoming a thing, and having to listen to people talk about how they can't speak to somebody who has something stuck in their nose, and that's psychological noise. I'm glad most of us have kind of gotten past that. Tattoos, for years, tattoos created a tremendous amount of internal and psychological noise. Here you go. Let's say you're having romantic troubles, and now you got to go to class and listen to an instructor drone on about something like psychological noise, and you're having romantic troubles. You're having trouble focusing on the instructor because you're thinking about the problems you're having in your romantic relationship. That is also psychological noise. But one of the big points I'm showing you this, giving you this is kind of the subtext for this point here. When it comes to actually interpreting and applying meaning to a message, if you have 100%, the sender gets to determine the meaning and the interpretation of the message on a scale down to, in the middle, it's 50%, 50%, and then at the other end, it is the receiver that has 100% control over the interpretation and the meaning of the message. Where do you think we are as a culture here in the United States? Are we more of a sender-oriented culture, or are we more of a receiver-oriented culture? And if we were in class, this would be an interesting discussion that we would go through. So I'm just going to tell you now that we are one of the most receiver-oriented cultures that there is. We're probably down in here somewhere in the 90 to 95%. Once you have sent a message, you've lost control of the meaning and the interpretation. And I know the first thing you're going to say as a sender is, that's not fair. Whether it's fair or not doesn't matter, because that's the reality. The receiver really does, in most contexts, in most situations, the receiver really does control the interpretation and the meaning of a message. And there's not a lot we can do about that. And sometimes it gets us into trouble. And so we have to be really, really careful. One time, I used to be on Twitter. I finally just got rid of it. It was too depressing. But early in my Twitter days, I was going back and forth with a friend who actually, his Twitter handle was not Frank Switzer, which he thought was very clever. And he used to post atheist quotes and stuff like that. But we were friends and all this stuff. But we were going back and forth, and I tweeted back at him. It's kind of to wrap up the little Twitter conversation we were having. And I said, well, you are just one SMF. And there was absolute silence for the next 2 days. Never responded. I called him an SMF. Okay. So after 2 days, he texted me and he said, Frank, I need to ask you what you meant by SMF. And I said, well, social media freak, what did you think I meant? And he said, you need to go look up on the Urban Dictionary what SMF means. And probably not the best thing that a pastor could be tweeting out. So I had to delete the tweet, which was probably too late, whatever. Anyway, receiver-oriented communication. He thought I called him something else, okay? My bad, not my intention. You see that? My bad, even though it wasn't my intention. We are a receiver-oriented communication culture. By the way, this is why politics are so divided today. We haven't always been a receiver-oriented culture. We generally, and I'm going back decades and decades now, generally we've been in this 50-50, 40-60 range. But we're down here now, and it's caused quite a bit of division, especially politically. It's one of the reasons why we're so politically divided. So that's receiver-oriented communication. So you need to do audience analysis. If we're a receiver-oriented communication culture, you need to learn as a public speaker how to analyze your audience so that you know how to reach them and connect with them and say things that will connect with them and not say things that will give them that psychological noise that will make them not want to listen to you. Okay? So, doing good audience analysis, it involves lots of demographics. You want to know, if you're going to have an audience of 150 people, you want to know generally what's going on with gender, with age, with education, with their relationship to each other, with their relationship with professional associations, their political affiliations. All of those things are going to be part of audience analysis. And you're going to want to gear what you have to say towards the audience so that it generally in a way that connects with as many people as possible. Not only that, but part of audience analysis also involves venue analysis. If you're asked to go and speak somewhere, it is really helpful and important if you can. Sometimes you can't. It's physically impossible. But if you can, you're invited to speak somewhere, go and visit the venue before you actually have to speak there so that you have an understanding of how the venue is laid out, what's going to be happening in the venue, what kind of sound system they have, what kind of mic you're going to be required to use. That's going to help you as well with your audience. You're going to want to ask questions like, am I going to speak right after lunch? If you're going to speak right after lunch, generally people are with you for about the first 10 minutes and then the digestion starts to set in and you have to compete with the body trying to digest food, which makes people sleepy. So you got to add that into the mix, okay? Audience analysis is also helpful in understanding how long you can speak to an audience. Some audiences are really good at listening to 10 to 15 minutes, but then they're done. Some audiences are ready to listen for 40 minutes, and so that's helpful to understand as well. So do good audience analysis. I have found that good audience analysis also helps reduce the amount of nervousness or anxiety I'm going to have about speaking to a group. If I walk into a group and I have no idea what I'm going to encounter, that can be pretty nerve-wracking too. But if you've done good audience analysis, you understand your audience, maybe you've even attended one of their events in the past so that you have some understanding of the audience, that's going to help reduce anxiety and nervousness. Let me ask you this question. It'll be a question on one of the two quizzes. Those of you who are majoring in English, you should know the answer to this. When somebody writes a sentence, what is the strongest part of the sentence? Is it the noun? Is it the verb? Is it the adjective? Is it the direct object? The subject, the predicate? What is the strongest part of any sentence? The strongest part of any sentence is where the action is. So the strongest part of any sentence is going to be the verb. It's the verb. And when you're speaking, doing public speaking, that means you should be careful and very intentional about the verbs that you choose to use in your speaking. And you also want to try to stay away from passive verbs. You want good, strong, active verbs when you're speaking. Passive verbs tend to do exactly what they sound like. They're not that interesting and they tend to put audiences to sleep. So the strongest part of a sentence is going to be a verb. Let me erase here for just a second because I'm now going to, especially that SMF, I want to get rid of that. Right, Caleb? You can say right. Okay, thank you. Right now, you should be running to the refrigerator to get a refreshing beverage to help you get through the rest of this video without even having to pause the video. Oh, man. All right. Sorry, it's all dirty now. So, very important to know, speeches should have three characteristics, primary characteristics, in terms of their ethos. Speeches should be appropriate. They should be culturally sensitive. And they should be substantive. When I was in graduate school at Arizona State University, the very first academic paper I wrote was for one of my favorite professors there, Dr. Susan Messman. I was taking her theory and methodology class, which was incredible. She was very, very good at what she did. And so I wrote this paper, and it was interesting. She called me in to her office at one point. She said, I got to have an appointment. She sat me down, and she gave me an A on the paper, but she also said, man, I've rarely had a student who can include so much information in so little time. She said, you write very thickly, you write very densely. You have 5 to 7 minutes to inform us on a topic in your informative speech. You need to figure out how to get substance in there. It's pretty easy to kind of fluff your way through 5 minutes. It really is. And by the way, I'm going to know if you fluffed your way through 5 minutes, and it's not going to go well for your grade. You need the second part of that. There's 3 major parts to the grading rubric. So there's, did you follow the 6-step guide? How was your content? And then how was your delivery? And then a few extra things about bibliography, outline, and visual aid. But those 3 major areas of the grading rubric, that middle one, the one on content, okay, that's the one where if you're fluffing your way through, you're going to get marked down a lot of points. There needs to be substance there. You need to have some good information, okay? Obviously culturally sensitive. If our goal is to run around and offending people, we're probably not going to be very effective at public speaking. That doesn't mean that you don't choose challenging and hard topics. That's not what that means. What it means, though, is that you need to be able to handle it in a sensitive way. If you're going to talk about abortion, recognize that there's probably somebody in your audience who has had an abortion, and it could be emotional for them. So examples like that, you know. I am a white man. If I'm going to talk about race, I'm going to have to be sensitive and careful about that. Doesn't mean that I don't get to talk about it, but I need to be careful how I talk about it, okay? And it needs to be appropriate. So, and I've had my run-ins with inappropriosity. I think that's a Michael Scott word, isn't it? Inappropriosity. I've had my run-ins with that. I've been doing public speaking for decades, and I've made my mistakes, trust me, and I've learned from them. And being inappropriate is not easily recovered. It's hard to recover from that. So, and then these are tidbits and tips and insights, and so they're just going to come at you sort of randomly, and I hope you can appreciate that. A lot of the quiz number 1 is going to be over the information in this video, but this is just information I need to get to you. Pay attention to your allotted times on the speeches. You've got a window on every one of your speeches. Your autobiographical, 3 to 5 minutes. If you speak less than 3 minutes, you're going to get penalized. If you speak more than 5 minutes, you're going to get penalized. So land in the middle of that window. Informative speech, 5 to 7 minutes. Persuasive speech, 6 to 8 minutes. And the tribute speech, 5 to 7 minutes. So pay attention to your allotted times. You're going to want to quote in an academically credible way some of your sources in your speech. That's what helps make a speech substantive, if you can kind of show your homework by giving us a quote from a scholarly journal or from a quarterly or something like that. The book, your textbook on page 49, has excellent help on how you should go about verbalizing an academic quote. Now, obviously, you're in college, so you already know about APA and MLA and all of that stuff. So you've got that figured out, I hope. If you don't, you should. But how to verbalize it, page 49 will help you with that. Presentational aids. You're required in 3 of the speeches to have a presentational aid. And really, the presentational aid, most people for presentational aids, they're now using PowerPoint or Prezi or something like that, and that's usually the best use of a presentational aid. But you need to be careful how you use those presentational aids. The person who uses PowerPoint and puts up on their PowerPoint slides the manuscript of their speech, that's not a good use of a visual aid. That's not helpful. Don't do that. You want to have a lot of space around any text in a slide, a PowerPoint slide. In other words, give us bullet points. That's about it. So that we're trying to listen to you, the speaker. We don't want to also have to think hard about what's on the screen. Pictures are always very helpful in terms of getting your point across on things, even better than text most of the time. So be careful with your visual aids. Here's a visual aid you should never, ever use. And when I'm in in-person classes, occasionally I'll have this happen. Somebody will actually be speaking to the class, and they'll have a 3x5 photograph, and they'll hold it up to show the class. Well, nobody can see it. It's not helpful. It's very distracting. And we have technology now where you can scan that photo and put it into a PowerPoint slide, and it's much bigger. So anyway, be careful with your visual aids, but understand that visual aids are really important to help get a point across, and we want you to learn how to use them effectively and creatively and in a way that isn't awkward, okay? One of the most important things for how to get your speech ready for the final presentation are what I call the 3 Ps. Now, the 3 Ps are going to be in a couple of different places in this course where you have to actually fill in the blank, write it out. What are the 3 Ps of public speaking? And you need to write these out. So write these down now so that you can write them out later or type them out in Canvas. But here you go. A speech, the process of a speech starts with planning. So you need to plan, then you need to prepare, and then you need to practice. And I'm going to put a little asterisk by practice because that's the one where most people tend to fall down on, unfortunately, thinking that they don't need to do that. So planning is probably what most of you are already doing. Planning is just sort of thinking about what your topics might be, how you might arrange the main points for those topics, where you might go for in order to resource those topics. You're surfing the internet looking for help with your topics. You're kind of just planning, kind of thinking about it. You're dreaming, maybe, okay? So that's planning. Very important part of the process, okay? Then you move into preparation. You're going to prepare. Preparing now is actually finding things that you want to say in your speech, and you start to make notes. And you're writing things down. You're citing things. And now in that preparation process, you're also starting to figure out where that information should go. And you're starting to see your 3 main points sort of emerge. Well, this information goes really well with main point 1. This information goes really well with main point 3. And you're beginning to see those main points emerge. That's the preparation. And then once you kind of feel like you have the first draft, a rough draft of your 3 main points, you think this might be okay, there's going to be some tweaking, maybe you'll need to move some things around, but I think I've got pretty much what I want to do. Then you're able to start looking at your excite step, your launch step, your relate step, your reiterate step, and your energize step. That's the preparation part. Then you get to the practice. A lot of students think, I've done this well, I don't really need to do that. That's a mistake. That is a huge mistake. The practice part means you actually have to stand up somewhere, usually alone, And it feels really awkward. I still do this today. It's going to feel awkward, but you have to practice your speech out loud. Out loud. You can't just go through it in your head. You go through things in your head way faster than you can say them out loud. So you have to say it out loud. Also, here you go, write this down. The written word is different than the spoken word. You can write something down and it reads beautifully. That's wonderful prose. That's outstanding. People will be moved by that sentence or that paragraph. But you try to read that out loud or speak that out loud, and it just doesn't work. So one of the reasons you have to do it out loud also, not only because it slows you down and you have a better understanding of how long your speech is going to be, but it also helps you to understand how you have to start to wordsmith your speech. You have to change words. You have to change the order of words so that it sounds better. Reading has to do with the eyes. Speaking has to do with the ears, and they process information differently. And so you need to say it out loud to wordsmith your speech to make sure it's going to sound helpful to the audience. But also, as you're saying it out loud, time and time again, practicing several times, you're also going to time it because you want to make sure that you're going to land within that window of the speech assignment requirements. So you don't want to have a beautifully planned and prepared speech and then you record the speech and it's 14 minutes long. You're not going to get very many points. And I'm going to know you didn't practice at that point. So you have to practice. So plan, prepare, and practice. Please don't forget to practice. And I know some of you are like, well, I'm going to practice on the video camera. And if my first time practicing it, it's really good, I'm going to send that in and submit that as my recording. Great. Good for you. I'm all for that. But also, if the first time you practice it, it's not wordsmithed well and you're going over or under time, you need to re-record it and then submit it. Okay? So plan, prepare, and practice. Sometimes a student will have way too much information. They'll be at 9 minutes for a speech that should only be 7 minutes long. And that's a really helpful discipline to learn. And the reason is, in movie making, they have an Oscar for best film editing. It's one of the most coveted Oscar awards by the Academy. Best editor is one of the most coveted Oscars because everyone knows that usually if you've won best editor, you are in the running for best picture as well. Good movies always have good editors. So here you go. Here's what movie editors will always tell you. They will always tell you that a movie is made not by what you decide to include, but what you decide to cut and leave on the cutting room floor. It's the same thing with public presentations. It's the same thing with public speeches. Good public presentations, good speeches, good Sunday morning messages in church are determined not by what is included, but rather by what is cut out, so that you have only the best of the best that's left. So that's a good discipline to learn. And then the other thing is, as you're going through these 3 points, plan, prepare, and practice, at some point, usually somewhere in here, kind of as you're transitioning from preparing to practicing, a lot of times speakers will say, oh my gosh, this is not working out. I picked the wrong topic. This is awful. I need to go find another topic. And suddenly you start to panic and you're scrambling and you're looking for another topic and now you don't have much time. Don't do that. Stick with the topic you have. I've been doing this for decades and I still go through that. Almost every public presentation I do, in whatever venue it is, at some point I'm looking at it and I'm saying to myself, this is an absolute mess. Why did I ever decide to talk about this? And my inclination is to say, I got to change my direction, I got to change my topic. But I've learned to stick with it because that's just part of the process. You're working the kinks out, and the kinks make it bad. And so you got to work the kinks out. And that's why you need to work hard at preparation, but then make sure you're practicing so that you can get that final product the way you like it. You change topics, you're going to run into the same problem with that new topic. This isn't working either. Then you're going to go back to the original topic. You're not going to have time. Anyway, you get the point. It's very important for a public speaker to be confident. Audiences like confidence, but you can't be so confident that you are bordering on or you enter into full-on arrogance. If you're arrogant, audiences don't like that. Where is that line? You got to figure it out for yourself. But you need to be confident. You need to be willing to step up, pretend that you're the pro from Dover. That's an old saying from my generation. It means you're the person coming in from the outside that knows what you're talking about. You're the pro from Dover. You need to present yourself as, yeah, I'm the expert on this topic that I'm going to present to you, but you need to do it in a way that projects confidence and not arrogance. So that's really helpful. One way you can do that is to choose a topic that you like and that you're motivated by and that you're comfortable with, something that you've worked with in the past. You need to analyze your audience. That helps you to be confident. Don't procrastinate. If you procrastinate, it does not help your confidence. You will be unconfident if you procrastinate. So prepare early and prepare often. Practice out loud, like I said. And here you go. Never apologize in order to try to mitigate your performance. Never during your performance say, yeah, I probably should have had more sources. I probably should have talked about that long. Don't do that. If you've ever been in theater, you know that if you miss a line or make a mistake, the cardinal sin is to draw attention to it by trying to apologize for it or mitigate for it. Don't do that. You got to just keep going. I missed a line once in a play at Grand Canyon when I was there as a student. When you're an older student at a small liberal arts college and you audition for plays, they give you parts because they need old people. It doesn't matter if you have talent, they just need old people. So I got parts at Grand Canyon University, and during one of the performances, I missed a line, and I so badly, because I'm a type A personality, I wanted to go back and explain to the audience, I was supposed to say this here. That would have just been stupid. You got to just keep going. Don't apologize in the midst of your speech. Keep going. Maybe you missed something, but just keep going. And then, because we're not in person, if it's really a big mistake, re-record your speech, okay? Nervousness. Nervousness does not show up like you think it does. I know you're standing there and you're thinking, man, I'm really nervous. By the way, don't ever at the beginning of a speech, never, ever say, I'm really nervous. Don't say that, okay? What you're communicating to the audience when you say, I'm really nervous, is this is going to be a bad experience for you. That's what they're going to hear. You don't want to say that. And you're going to be nervous. Just count on it. You're going to be nervous. Here's the thing about nervousness, though. Audiences are for the speaker. They want the speaker to do well, and they're not going to notice your nervousness. All the things that you're feeling and that you're sure, the kind of little shaking of the hand, the little bit of sweat, sometimes I pit out, the knees are a little bit wobbly, the dry mouth. You're sure that your audience is noticing that. Actually, they're not. They're not noticing that. They're going to notice if you have a pen and you're standing there talking and you're clicking a pen while you're talking because you're nervous. They're going to notice that. They're going to notice if you throw up. They're going to notice if you faint. They're going to notice things like that, yes, but that rarely happens. The stuff that mostly happens to us, they're not going to notice. I know you think they're going to notice it, but don't worry, they're not going to notice it. And by the way, some nervousness is really good. We need to be somewhat nervous. One of the greatest public speakers who ever lived is a guy named Cavett Robert. He was a motivational speaker. He was actually from Phoenix. He was an attorney here in Phoenix. And he used to say all the time at public speaking seminars, he would say, listen, you can't get over the nervousness because everybody has butterflies. If you've heard that expression, it feels like you have butterflies fluttering around in your stomach. It's a nervous stomach. Everybody has butterflies. What your job is to try to figure out how to get them to fly in formation. You got to figure out how to channel that nervousness, that energy. And that nervousness is coming from adrenaline. Everybody has adrenaline when they're called upon to perform. You're going to get a surge of adrenaline. And just know that within the first minute of your speech, that surge of adrenaline has now dissipated and you're going to be able to settle in and it's not going to be a problem. No matter what, no matter how nervous you are, within about a minute, you're going to be like, I'm fine now. I mentioned that I was a distance runner. When I was in my 20s, and early 30s here in the late 20s and early 30s here in Arizona, I was one of the top distance runners in the state, and I would, every other weekend or so, I would run in these 10K, 8K, 15K, half marathon road races, and every time I stepped up to the starting line, I was nervous, and I hated that. I hated it. And one of the things I found about that nervousness, though, is that about a minute after the gun went off, it was gone, and I was fine. So it was just something I had to put up with. But I did run one race where I wasn't feeling nervous, and it taught me a lesson. I got to this race. It was a medium-sized 8K, which is about 5 miles, out in Scottsdale at Coronado Park, which is sort of in the South Scottsdale area. And there were 700 or 800 participants there, so it's about a medium-sized race. And I'm looking around, and I realize there's no one there who's ever beaten me at this distance. And no one has even come close to beating me at this distance. So I'm running my warm-up, and I'm starting to feel pretty good about this race. And suddenly my nervousness went away. I wasn't nervous anymore. So about 20 minutes later, I walk up to the starting line, absolutely no nervousness. The gun goes off, and I start running. And I just can't seem to get it into gear. And I'm kind of running 5th or 6th or 7th, and I'm thinking, these guys ahead of me, they shouldn't be ahead of me. And I would try to gear up the energy to catch them, and I couldn't do it. And I ended up finishing 5th in the race. 4 people in this race beat me who had never beaten me before, and I ran 2 minutes slower than I normally ran the 8K distance at. And as I'm driving home thinking, that was miserable, I began to realize I thought it would be a great victory if I could start running races without being nervous, and I realized you need a little bit of that nervous energy. You need that to be sharp and focused for your performance. So embrace the nervousness. It's good for you to some extent. When it comes to delivery, make sure you check that delivery section of the grading rubric. That's very, very important. Understand what paralanguage is. Maybe you've taken classes where you've heard what paralanguage is. Paralanguage is the nonverbal aspect of verbal communication. It's not hand gestures, it's not eye contact, it's not facial expressions. It is paralanguage, the nonverbal aspect of verbal communication. In other words, it's the rate at which you speak. How fast do you speak? Do you speak 135 words per minute? Or do you speak 170 words per minute? Which one is it? By the way, if you're speaking 170, people are going to struggle to keep up and listen. 135 to 145 is generally the best place for people to be able to listen. So what's your rate? What's your volume? How loud do you speak? I tend to be a pretty heavy speaker when it comes to volume. Some people are like, you don't even need amplification, but that's fine. So pitch also. What levels do your voice go to? What undulation does your voice have during the middle of a sentence? And then tone. Are you a happy speaker? Are you an angry speaker? Are you a sad speaker? Are you an enthusiastic speaker? Are you a compassionate speaker? What does your tone convey? That's what paralanguage is. It's the nonverbal aspect of verbal communication. And it's a very important part of becoming a competent public speaker to try to figure out these things as well. So know about these items as well. Also in paralanguage, I've noticed this a lot. In terms of pitch, we have recently discovered, and it's even on the grading rubric now. You can find it on the grading rubric, and you can learn about it by reading about it. You have to get away from upspeak. This is something kind of new, like the last 5 to 8 years, that younger speakers tend to do when they're speaking to somebody. Upspeak is raising your pitch at the end of a sentence, like every sentence. So if I'm talking to you about public speaking, I will tend to raise my voice at the end of every sentence. And sometimes it can be really annoying to people to listen to somebody who's raising their voice all the time at the end of a sentence. But people do this upspeak. They don't even realize they're doing it. It's a problem. It communicates, Some people say, well, it communicates humility. No, it doesn't. It communicates insecurity and uncertainness. That's what it's communicating to your listeners. So be careful of the upspeak. Obviously, you want to have, and I know you're being videoed on a very small recording device, but be careful of your gestures. Try to give us some sort of little bit of body movement. I found that some of the better speeches have been not somebody sitting right in front of the camera so that all I can see is their face. That's a little much for 5 to 7 minutes. But rather somebody who has stepped back, they've set up the camera so that I can see most or all of their body. You also do have to be careful of your volume when you do that. So you need to make sure that you take care of your volume as you're stepping away from your recording device. But we want to see if you're working on gestures. Your eye contact is important. One of the things I've noticed about people recording their speeches on recording devices is they will spend all of their time not looking into the camera, but instead looking at their notes in their manuscript. By the way, that's how I know that you're actually reading from a manuscript. You never make eye contact with the camera. Please make eye contact with the camera. And then this is important, man. You've got to be able to articulate and do excellent pronunciation. You need to be careful of your fillers, which I just did one. That's a filler. You need to be careful of the uhs, ums, you knows, and likes. Be very careful of those filler words. You'll get marked down on those. But also articulation and pronunciation. If you're giving a speech and you have prepared and practiced your speech, you should know how to say the terms in your speech. Practice saying the terms and the names that are in your speech. Here you go. Random thought here, very important. You must include a works cited and a word processed outline with every single speech assignment, except no works cited on the autobiography. That kind of makes sense. But you need a works cited, a word processed, works cited document for your informative, tribute, and persuasive speech. And you need these 6-point word processed outlines given to me also for your speeches. You are required in your first 3 speeches to speak extemporaneously. If you look in your textbook on page 92, there is a wonderful definition that Cristiano and Ramirez have written on what extemporaneous speaking is. And then I sort of summarize that definition with 2 words. Be conversational. Speak in a conversational way to your audience. Here's the definition, and you should go and read this as well. Extemporaneous speaking is speaking from an outline or notes. The speaker prepares and practices the speech to the point where an outline or notes serve only as a guide to memory. Even when using a sentence outline, the speaker uses the information in the outline as an aid from which the speaker elaborates extemporaneously on the ideas expressed in the outline. Talk a little bit about testimonials and how that can be, at times, a source. A source for a speech that you're giving. Let's say you're giving an informative speech on law enforcement weaponry, and your uncle is a Phoenix police officer. You might bring your uncle in and interview him for a minute about what it is that does he use a 9mm? What kind of handgun does he use? What are some of the, you might interview your uncle. And that's a testimonial. That's a form of testimonial that you can give. Or if you're trying to persuade somebody about something, you can have somebody stand up and give their story about their interaction with the topic. That also is a testimonial. If any of you are what I call infomercial junkies, years ago, I'm too old now to be an infomercial junkie, but an infomercial junkie is you got home late at night, you've been out, you've had a good time, but you're not quite ready to go to bed, so you turn on the TV, and there's an infomercial on TV at midnight, and it's some guy in a chef's hat, and he's got some new kitchen appliance that slices, dices, makes phone calls, cooks steak, whatever it does. It's this incredible kitchen appliance, and it takes 3 seconds to wash, and it cuts down all of the time and food preparation and all of that. And and it can also defend you from burglars. And anyway, they're trying to sell you something. At some point during those 30-minute or 60-minute infomercials, what they'll do is they'll have a person who has the product and is very happy with it. They'll come onto the set and they will say, oh, this is what my life was like before I got the amazing slicer dicer machine. It was horrible. My life was terrible. I was cutting things. I was cutting my fingers. The cleanup took forever, and I was slicing up our marble countertops, and it was terrible. But then I got Dr. Know-It-All's amazing slicer dicer machine, and now it takes me 15 minutes to prepare a 17-course meal and only 3 seconds to clean up, and I am just the queen of the neighborhood. Everybody wants to eat at my house. So that's like a testimonial. I remember years ago when The Walking Dead first became a popular show. Not so popular anymore. I think everybody's kind of over it now. But when The Walking Dead first became a popular show, everybody was interested in zombies. And so I actually had some informative speeches on how to prepare for the zombie apocalypse. And I had 2 different students during 2 different semesters actually have a friend of theirs dress up as a zombie and barge into the classroom in the middle of their informative speech to make a point. I guess you could say that that's sort of a form of testimonial as well. Illustrations are always helpful in speaking. By illustrations, I mean a story that helps explain what you're trying to get across with words. A story that paints a picture, a story that illustrates in some way what it is that you're trying to say. Some people will call them parables. A parable, narrowly defined, a parable is a worldly illustration that points to and explains a spiritual truth, but a parable also can be a story about a person that helps explain a philosophical truth. That's also a parable. So it's good to have illustrations. It's good to have stories. You got to be careful with editing them and keeping them short. Statistics, stats. Well, I'm going to give an informative speech, and I want to use a lot of statistics. I want to use some stats. Okay, that's good, but be careful. You have to keep it simple when you use stats. When you're writing a complex graduate-level research paper, yes, your statistics can be extraordinarily layered and complex because somebody's reading it and they can reread it, they can hit the pause button, they can think about it, they can put it together. But when you're speaking publicly, nobody can hit the pause button on you. And so if you have complicated and layered statistics, you're going to be in trouble. So if you're giving a speech on apple pie and you say, you know, there's really 2 main kinds of apple pie. There's Dutch apple and there's French apple. And 57% of people in the United States prefer Dutch apple to French apple. That's great. That's a great statistic. 1 level, not very complex. We can digest that. No pun intended. But if you say, you know, there's 2 main kinds of apple pies, Dutch and French. 57% of Americans prefer Dutch apples. What's interesting about that 57% is that 43% of that 53% prefer their Dutch apple pie with a slice of cheese, and of that 43% of the 57% prefer their cheese, 7% prefer their cheese to be Swiss as opposed to cheddar or provolone. Okay, by the time you've gotten past that first level with an audience, they're done. They're not listening to you anymore. So don't layer your statistics. Don't make them too complicated. Make sure that you quote from credible sources. Don't use Wikipedia. Wikipedia is a wonderful tool because you can find credible sources on Wikipedia, but don't quote from Wikipedia because there's no benchmark or standards for what the information you're getting there. But many of the essays on Wikipedia obviously have academic citations which you can click on and go to and actually read the academic article that is legitimate, and you can quote from that. But quote from credible sources, and of course never plagiarize. Do not plagiarize. How do you spell plagiarize? Good grief. I am starting, is that right? I'm starting to get, you looking it up? I'm starting to get tired, y'all. But don't plagiarize. And the reason I'm worried about the spelling is because this will be a fill in the blank, okay? By the way, if you answer on the quiz as a fill in the blank and you misspell something, you're probably going to get the points because, well, if you spelled Here you go. If you misspell plagiarize with an S instead of a Z, I'm obviously going to give you the points. But if you spell plagiarize Y2 asterisk N, no, you're not getting the points. You see what I'm saying? Okay, good. Let's talk a little bit about persuasive speaking. Probably going to put some stuff up here. That's why I'm erasing it again. There's one major point I want to make about persuasive speaking that I learned I need to make from last semester. I was just stunned by something last semester. And I've lost there it is. Okay. Good. All right. Persuasive speaking. Cristiano and Ramirez have a wonderful definition on page 131 of the textbook. It is to convince your audience members to accept your point of view and possibly change their behaviors. Your goal is to influence the audience. Persuasive speeches are likely controversial. If there's no controversy, there is no need for persuasion. Good point. I want to find a persuasive speech that's not controversial. Okay, here you go. I've had some students do stuff like that. They've given speeches on why you shouldn't smoke cigarettes. I don't get it. If somebody wants to smoke cigarettes in this culture today, you're not going to convince them not to smoke cigarettes. They've made up their mind. Everybody knows that it's unhealthy to smoke cigarettes. I used to be a smoker, by the way. I did. Did you know that, Caleb? I was a smoker. Yeah, it's been 40 years, so I quit when I was 21. But I was a smoker. And I liked menthol. See, I was going green before anybody else was going green. I'm telling you. But anyway, and by the way, this idea that, you quit smoking, within 6 months you will never crave it again. I'm 40 years into this, and occasionally I still crave smoking. I smell somebody else smoking a cigarette. Here's the worst part. In the morning, I'm on the canal bank running. Somebody's out in their backyard smoking a cigarette. I'm out running, and I smell the cigarette, and I'm like, that smells really good. Anyway, don't give a speech. That's such a junior high speech. Here's why you shouldn't smoke cigarettes, okay? Let's find something else. Oh, by the way, here's the other junior high speech that I don't like. I'm going to convince you that you need to have safe sex. Okay, if you're in college now, if you haven't figured that out, I don't know where you've been living. Okay, so let's not have any safe sex or no smoking speeches. Okay, let's get a little bit more advanced than that. So, convince your audience members to accept your point of view and possibly change their behaviors. Your goal is to influence the audience. Persuasive speeches are likely controversial. If there's no controversy, there's no need for persuasion. Here's a couple of things that you really need to know, though, about persuasive speaking. Here's a topic. Let's say it's reparations is the topic. And you're at a 10 on reparations. You are all in on reparations. And you're speaking to an audience that's pretty much at a 0 on reparations. I know for a fact that what most novice or beginning speakers think is that in 6 to 8 minutes, they will be able to take an audience that's at a 0 on a topic, and they'll be able to move them to a 10. No, you won't. You can't. It's impossible. In fact, you will do more damage to your cause trying to move an audience from a 0 to a 10, no matter what you do. You'll do more damage. You'll actually move them into a negative number. I've seen it happen over and over and over and over again. Here you go. Persuasive speaking, write this down. Persuasive speaking is incremental. It's incremental. Persuasive speaking comes in increments. There is a multiple choice question where I ask, persuasive speaking is mostly A, emotional, B, agricultural, C, academic, D, incremental. I cannot believe how many students, this is the culture we live in right now, how many students have answered that question, oh, it's mostly emotional. No, it's not. Yes, there are emotions involved in persuasive speaking, But it's wrong for it to be all about emotion. If you're just about emotion and persuasive speaking, you're not going to get anywhere. It's incremental. Learn that it's incremental. Here you go. You're at a 10 on reparations. Your audience is at a 0. If you can get some of your audience members to a 0.5, to they're just starting to change, maybe they're open to thinking a little bit differently about reparations, that is a capital V victory in persuasive speaking. Research shows that on average it takes 10 to 15 exposures to a new idea to actually move people down the scale. 10 to 15 times. No one is skilled enough to be able to take somebody from a 0 to a 10 in 6 to 8 minutes, especially when generally they need 10 to 15 exposures to that way of thinking. So persuasive speaking is incremental, okay? Good persuasive speaking, here you go. This is going to shock some of you. You're going to be like, really? Is that true? Yes, it is. Good persuasive speaking is not about changing a heart. It's about changing your mind. You start with the mind. Then the heart will follow. So everybody's like, I just got to get to their heart. Well, you actually get to their heart through their mind. I'm telling you, that's the most important thing that you can do with your persuasive speaking. A lot of persuasive speakers feel like if they just show enough emotion, their audiences are going to be convinced, and that backfires most often. You can be passionate. Please, be passionate. That's good, but just emoting is not going to move anybody anywhere. All right, here you go. Avoid these pitfalls. I've already talked about some of these. We're almost done. Aren't you glad? Avoid these pitfalls. Don't apologize in the middle of your speech. Avoid promising something that you can't deliver. A lot of times people will promise something in a speech or in a presentation that they end up not being able to deliver, and that really disappoints an audience. Avoid the excite step gimmicks, such as the chicken wing thing. So avoid gimmicks with your attention getter, your excite step. Have a good excite step, one that transitions your audience, one that is memorable, one that is helpful, but don't be gimmicky. Don't try to figure out things during your speech. Years and years and years ago, I had a student give an informative speech on the actor Al Pacino. Now, Al Pacino is one of my favorite actors. I don't think the student knew this, but it was apparent in the middle of this student's speech when they put up on the screen 6 different pictures from still shots from 6 different movies that Al Pacino was in, and the student suddenly realized that they didn't know what movie was with what picture. And I'm sitting there going, well, that's Heat, and that's Donnie Brasco, and that's, Godfather. I was able to, I didn't even prepare for the speech, and I was able to point out all, I didn't say it out loud. I'm just saying, the student then was stuck trying to figure something out in the middle of the speech. That didn't go very well. That's why you have to, just imagine that plan, prepare, and practice is still up here. That's why you have to plan, prepare, and practice. You got to practice. You got to know where your problems might come. I mentioned this already. Never say, I'm nervous. Don't introduce new material in the conclusion part of your speech. So you have the 6-step guide, which we went through in the last video. Okay? So you have the excite step, the launch step, the relate step, your main points. I almost wrote an M. Your reiterate step, and your energize step. The conclusion portion of your speech is reiterate and energize. Once you get past your main points, don't introduce new material. That's not helpful. Okay? Don't dilute your position. Don't say at the end of the speech, hey, I hope I did okay. I know I could have done better. Just don't do that. Okay? Let the audience decide how you did. Some of us are way more hard on ourselves than our audience is going to be. So just be careful about that. And then finish well. Finish your speech well. Invest time in these last 2 points. Reiterate and energize. Spend some time on this, making sure that you remember to do it and that you do it well. You're gonna forfeit quite a few points if you don't do that well. And as I've said, as an entire school, we've struggled to be able to get students to understand the importance of that. Finally, last item. There are 4 fallacies of public speaking. You should write these down. I'm not going to put them on the board. I'm done writing. I'm tired. Caleb's yawning too. He's ready for me to wrap up. All right, here we go. The 4 fallacies of public speaking. In other words, these are things that you as a student of public speaking are probably going to think at some time or another, and it's a fallacy, okay? Here it is, the fallacy of catastrophic failure. That's the person who thinks that no matter what, they're going to get up and fail catastrophically. Or the person who thinks that after they've gotten up and delivered their speech, it was a catastrophic failure. I've been doing this 25 years at the college level, GCU, Fuller, Paradise Valley Community College, all kinds of different venues. I have yet to experience a catastrophic failure by a student. Okay? Now, I have experienced a couple of sabotaged failures where a student specifically went out of the way to sabotage their effort. I could tell you stories, but I'm not going to bore you with that right now. That's different. Self-sabotage is different than catastrophic failure. You just decided you wanted to blow up your own speech at that point. The fallacy of catastrophic failure is the person who thinks they're going to fail catastrophically or think they did fail catastrophically. There's the fallacy of approval. Oh my gosh, this is so hard for so many public speakers. It's especially hard for anybody who's trying to get into the very difficult realm of stand-up comedy. The fallacy of approval is that everybody has to like me and everybody has to like everything that I said. That's an unrealistic expectation. It's not even a goal. It's an impossibility. You're going to have people who aren't going to like you very much. They're not going to like what you have to say. They're not going to like how you say it. That's just the way it is. Listen, I've done this long enough to know. There are times when I'm speaking where there are some people who are leaning in. They are hanging on everything that I'm saying. They're writing stuff down. And there are other people who are shaking their head and getting up and walking out. Same speech. The fallacy of approval is very destructive to us. You got to understand, not everybody's going to like you. Okay? Then there's the fallacy of perfection, which is kind of, it's sort of the different side of the same coin of the fallacy of approval. It's this idea that I have to be perfect, or why am I bothering to do it at all? You're not going to be perfect. You're just not going to be perfect. Now, occasionally, I will have a speech where somebody gets every possible point. Doesn't happen all the time, doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. Again, what I'm trying to do with these assignments, what all of the instructors are trying to do with these assignments, is we're trying to see if you're following the assignment and learning something. There's value there. There's a sense of perfection there. Did you have perfect delivery? Not necessarily, but you followed the guidelines. But this idea that you have to be absolutely perfect every time, you're just not going to be able to do it. I speak 35 minutes every Sunday, twice. There's no way. There's no way. And I've been doing this a long time. So that's number 3 is the fallacy of perfection. And the last one is the fallacy of overgeneralization. The fallacy of overgeneralization is somewhat the other side of the coin to the fallacy of catastrophic failure. The fallacy of overgeneralization is when you finish a presentation and you say, oh, that thing was totally a bomb. Okay, maybe there were some areas that could have been better, but it wasn't totally a bomb. Or you finish a presentation and you're kind of walking around going, man, I hit it out of the park. I am the bomb, okay? No. Believe me, we're going to be able to find some things that you need to work on and improve, okay? So that's the fallacy of overgeneralization. What the fallacy of overgeneralization does, which is not helpful, is it prevents you from honestly critiquing your performance so that you can get better in the future. That's the problem with fallacy of overgeneralization. That is our tips and insights video. That's the last that you're going to hear from me on these videos. unless I go crazy and decide to throw another one out there, but I doubt it because there won't be any points involved and you won't watch it. So why would I? All right. So thanks. Let's get going. Let's get this semester finished now. All right. Okay. Looking forward to your speeches. I'm done. Caleb, turn me off.